Let's begin. Austin Fisher had learned long ago that silence could be louder than screams. He'd spent 12 years as an investigative journalist before switching to documentary filmmaking, and in that time, he'd become an expert at reading the quiet moments, the pauses between words, the looks people thought no one noticed, the secrets hidden in plain sight. But nothing had prepared him for the silence in his own marriage. "We have to go, Austin." Laura stood in their bedroom doorway, her arms crossed in that defensive posture he'd grown to recognize over the past 3 years. "It's Christmas. They're my parents." Austin looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing footage for his latest project, a documentary about institutional abuse in youth programs. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Your father called Maya chunky at Thanksgiving. She didn't eat properly for a week." He was joking, but Laura's voice lacked conviction. "She's 10 years old, Laura. My mother's already set a place for us. If we don't show up, she'll what?" Austin stood, closing his laptop. "Be disappointed? Make passive-aggressive comments for the next 6 months?" He softened his tone, reaching for her hand. "Your parents have a way of making you feel guilty for having boundaries." Laura pulled away. "You don't understand. You grew up with normal parents who actually liked each other. My family is complicated." Austin's parents had died in a car accident when he was 25, leaving him with nothing but good memories and a deep appreciation for genuine love. The Cummings family was his opposite in every way: wealthy, where his family had been comfortable; cold, where his had been warm; performative, where his had been authentic. Norman Cummings had made his fortune in commercial real estate, building strip malls and shopping centers across 3 states. He wore his success like armor, constantly reminding everyone of their dependence on his generosity. Gladys, his wife of 38 years, had perfected the art of looking the other way, her smile painted on as permanently as her makeup. "Daddy, I don't want to go." 7-year-old Ethan appeared in the doorway, his Spider-Man pajamas hanging loose on his small frame. "Grandpa's mean." Austin knelt down, pulling his son into a hug. "What did Grandpa do, buddy?" Ethan's eyes shifted to his mother, then back to Austin. "Nothing. He just makes me nervous." Laura sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "See? Even the kids know we can't skip it. Come on, Austin. It's one dinner. A few hours. Then we can leave and have our own Christmas at home tomorrow." Austin studied his wife's face, seeing the exhaustion there, the weight of a lifetime of managing her father's moods and her mother's denial. He'd been with Laura for 14 years, married for 12, and every year the visits to her parents' estate grew more strained. "Fine." He ruffled Ethan's hair. "But the second anyone crosses a line—" "No one will cross a line," Laura said quickly. "Too quickly. It'll be fine." 3 hours later, Austin pulled their SUV through the iron gates of the Cummings estate, a sprawling colonial-style mansion in Connecticut's wealthiest suburb. Laura's brother Philip's BMW was already parked in the circular driveway, along with his wife Sylvia's Mercedes. Uncle Philip, Maya ran ahead, her dark curls bouncing. At 10, she still possessed the unself-conscious enthusiasm that Ethan was already losing. Philip swooped her up, spinning her around in a practiced gesture that looked affectionate but felt hollow to Austin. "There's my favorite niece. You've grown another foot." "I'm your only niece," Maya laughed. Philip Cummings was everything his father wanted: ambitious, ruthless in business, and willing to sacrifice anything for success. At 42, he ran the Western Division of Cummings Properties, expanding the empire while his father maintained control of the legacy holdings. His wife Sylvia taught art history at Yale, a fact Gladys mentioned at every opportunity as proof of the family's cultural sophistication. Norman appeared at the top of the front steps, a crystal tumbler of scotch already in his hand despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. At 71, he remained imposing, 6 feet tall, with silver hair swept back from a face that had grown harder with age, like stone weathered by years of cruelty instead of kindness. "About time," he called down. "Thought maybe you'd gotten lost." "Oh, that's right, you can't afford a proper navigation system." Austin felt Laura tense beside him. They lived comfortably on his documentary work and her job as a pediatric nurse. But to Norman, anything less than excessive wealth was poverty. "Merry Christmas, Norman." Austin kept his voice neutral, years of interviewing difficult subjects serving him well. "It's Mr. Cummings to you." Norman descended the steps, his movements still powerful despite his age. Or better yet, sir. You know, Philip calls me, sir. Philip also calls you dad, Austin replied evenly. Since I'm not your son, I'll stick with Norman. A vein pulsed in Norman's temple, but Gladys appeared in the doorway, her intervention perfectly timed after decades of practice. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. Laura, darling, you look thin. Are you eating enough? The house smelled of pine and expensive candles, every surface decorated with the kind of Christmas display that required professional designers. A massive tree dominated the foyer, its ornaments carefully curated antiques rather than the handmade treasures that filled Austin's childhood memories. In the formal living room, Austin watched Maya gravitate towards Sylvia, who was showing her pictures on her phone of a recent trip to Florence. Ethan stayed close to Austin's side, his small hand gripping his father's. Can I get you boys a drink? Philip appeared with a beer for Austin and a juice box for Ethan. Dad's serving his special scotch tonight. 25-year Macallan. Probably costs more than your monthly mortgage. Probably, Austin agreed, refusing to take the bait. Norman settled into his leather armchair like a king on his throne, surveying his domain. Philip, tell Austin about the Henderson deal. Show him what real success looks like. As Philip launched into a self-congratulatory story about acquiring a struggling property for pennies on the dollar and displacing 50 small businesses, Austin noticed Gladys watching Ethan with an odd expression, something between concern and calculation. Ethan, honey, would you help Grammy in the kitchen? She extended her hand. Ethan looked up at Austin, who nodded. Go ahead, buddy. But as Ethan crossed the room, Norman's foot shot out. Ethan stumbled, catching himself on the coffee table. The adults pretended not to notice, all except Austin and Maya, who'd been watching from across the room. Careful, boy, Norman said, his voice carrying an edge. Clumsy, just like your father. Austin started to rise, but Laura's hand on his arm stopped him. Don't, she whispered. Please. He just tripped our son. It was an accident. But Austin had seen Norman's face in that split second before Ethan stumbled, the deliberate cruelty, the satisfaction. He'd spent years interviewing abusers for his documentaries, learning to recognize the patterns. Norman Cummings wasn't just a difficult father-in-law. He was something darker. Dinner was announced, and they moved to the formal dining room where a table that could seat 20 held settings for 8. Norman took his place at the head, Gladys at the foot, with Philip and Sylvia on one side, Austin's family on the other. The meal began with the usual performance. Norman critiquing the wine Philip had brought, Gladys fussing over everyone's plates, Sylvia making polite conversation about nothing. Maya talked excitedly about her school's production of A Christmas Carol, while Ethan picked at his food, barely eating. Then Norman turned his attention to Austin. Still making those little movies of yours? When are you going to get a real job? I just finished a documentary that's been picked up by Netflix, Austin replied. Comes out in March. Netflix. Norman snorted. Everyone and their dog has something on Netflix. What's it about? More of your bleeding heart liberal agenda. It's about abuse in youth detention centers. Systemic failures that allowed children to be harmed by the people meant to protect them. The table went quiet. Laura shot him a warning look. Sounds depressing, Philip said. Who wants to watch that? People who care about protecting children, Austin said. People who believe in holding abusers accountable. Norman's jaw tightened. You know what your problem is, Austin? You see villains everywhere. The world isn't as black and white as you want to make it in your little documentaries. You're right, Austin agreed. Most abusers don't see themselves as villains. They justify their behavior, tell themselves they're teaching lessons or maintaining order. They hide behind authority and family loyalty. Daddy, Maya interjected, trying to break the tension. Can I tell everyone about the play? But Norman wasn't done. You think you're so smart with your cameras and your questions. But you don't know anything about building something real, creating a legacy. You're a parasite, living off other people's stories. Norman, please, Gladys said softly. It's Christmas. Austin was about to respond when Ethan reached for his water glass. His small hand was shaking from nerves or from Norman's oppressive presence, Austin couldn't tell. The glass tipped, water spreading across the white tablecloth in a dark stain. The room froze. Norman's chair scraped back with a sound like a gunshot. He was around the table in 3 strides, his hand clamping down on Ethan's thin arm with visible force. "You clumsy little—" Austin was moving, but not fast enough. Norman twisted Ethan's arm, and Austin heard a sound like a green branch snapping. Ethan's scream was cut short by Norman's open palm across his face, the slap echoing in the silent room. "That's for spilling water." Everyone kept passing dishes. Laura reached for the potatoes with trembling hands. Philip refilled his wine glass. Sylvia studied her plate. Gladys dabbed at the water with her napkin, her movements mechanical. And Ethan cried silently, tears streaming down his reddening cheek, cradling his arm. Austin's vision went white at the edges, rage unlike anything he'd ever felt coursing through him. He was halfway out of his chair when Maya stood up. "Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and cold in a way that made every adult at the table turn to look at her. "Should I show them what you did last night when you came to our house?" The room went dead silent. Norman's face drained of color, then flushed dark red. "Maya, sit down. Should I tell them where you put your hands? What you said I had to keep secret." "Maya!" Gladys's voice cracked like a whip. "That's enough." But Maya's eyes were on her grandmother, steady and accusing. "You knew, didn't you, Grammy? You were there. You saw him come into my room." Laura stood so fast, her chair fell backward. "What are you talking about?" Austin was already moving toward Ethan, pulling his son into his arms, his mind racing to process what Maya had just said, while his heart hammered with the need to protect both his children. "She's making things up," Norman said, but his voice had lost its authority, replaced by something desperate. "She's a confused little girl who—" "I'm not confused." Maya's hands were balled into fists at her sides. "You came to our house last night after Mom and Dad were asleep. You said Grammy sent you to drop off presents. You came into my room, and you touched my—" "We're leaving." Austin's voice cut through the chaos. He stood with Ethan in his arms, his son's weight barely registering. "Laura, get the car keys. Now." Laura stood frozen, looking between her daughter and her father, her face a mask of horror and disbelief warring with desperate denial. "Laura," I said now. Philip had gone pale. Sylvia had tears running down her face. Gladys sat like a statue, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking to reveal something cold and knowing beneath. "You can't just leave in the middle of dinner," Norman blustered, but he'd backed against the wall. His earlier dominance evaporated. "This is my house. I won't be accused. Your house." Austin's voice was deadly quiet as he looked at the man who'd just broken his son's arm, who'd apparently done something unspeakable to his daughter. "We'll see how long that lasts." He was at the door, Maya pressed against his side, and Ethan still in his arms, when Laura finally moved. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Laura, if you walk out that door," Norman started. "Shut up, Dad." Laura's voice broke. "Just shut up." In the car, Austin drove with one hand, the other checking Ethan's arm as carefully as he could while navigating the dark roads. Maya sat in the back seat, her brave composure finally breaking as sobs shook her small frame. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. He said Grammy would be sad if I told, and Mom would be angry, and—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Austin said, his voice thick with emotion. "Nothing. Do you hear me, sweetheart? None of this is your fault." Laura stared out the window, silent tears tracking down her face. Austin pulled into the emergency room parking lot, his mind already cataloging everything he needed to do. Get Ethan's arm treated and documented. Take Maya to be examined, file a police report, call a lawyer. But beneath the practical necessities, beneath the fury and the heartbreak, a cold certainty was forming. Norman Cummings had hurt his children, and Austin was going to make him pay for it in ways the old man couldn't begin to imagine. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast everyone in harsh relief as Austin carried Ethan through the automatic doors, Laura trailing behind with Maya's hand clutched in hers. The admitting nurse took one look at Ethan's swelling arm and the red handprint still visible on his face and immediately called for a doctor. How did this happen? The nurse's eyes moved between Austin and Laura, trained to spot the signs of parental abuse. His grandfather. Austin's voice was steady despite the rage still simmering beneath his skin. Twisted his arm until it broke, then slapped him. About 40 minutes ago. The The nurse's expression shifted from suspicion to sympathy. "We'll need to file a report with Child Protective Services. It's mandatory for suspected child abuse. I'll file one myself with the police as soon as my son's been treated," Austin said. "But there's something else." He glanced at Maya, who stood pressed against Laura's side, her earlier bravery replaced by the vulnerable fear of a traumatized child. "My daughter needs to be examined. Her grandfather. Last night he—" Austin couldn't finish the sentence. The nurse understood immediately. "I'll call for Dr. Harrison. She specializes in pediatric assault cases." The nurse's professionalism couldn't quite mask the anger in her eyes. "You did the right thing bringing them in." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of doctors, X-rays, gentle questions, and documentation. Ethan's arm was fractured, a clean break that would heal, the doctor assured them, but would require a cast for 6 weeks. The slap had left bruising along his jaw, photographed from multiple angles for evidence. Maya's examination was more complicated. Dr. Harrison, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, explained that she'd found evidence of inappropriate contact but no signs of penetration. She collected samples, taken photographs, and documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who'd testified in court before. "Your daughter was very brave, Doctor," Harrison told Austin and Laura in the hallway, while Maya was getting dressed. She gave a clear, consistent account. "Last night around 11 p.m., a man she identifies as her grandfather entered her bedroom. He touched her inappropriately over her clothes, told her it was their special secret, and said her grandmother knew he was there dropping off presents, so it was okay." Laura made a sound like she'd been punched. Austin pulled her against him, feeling her whole body shaking. "Based on Maya's account and what I found in the examination, I believe this may have been a first incident or a first escalation. Sometimes abusers test boundaries before progressing further. Doctor." Harrison's voice was clinical but compassionate. "The good news is you stopped it early. The bad news is that people who do this, it's rarely an isolated impulse." "You think he's done this before," Austin said. "Not a question. I think you should ask yourselves if he's had access to other children. Granddaughters, students, employees' kids. Men like this often have a pattern." After Dr. Harrison left, Austin made the call he'd been dreading. Detective Sylvia Schwartz from the Special Victims Unit arrived 30 minutes later, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened to their account without interruption, taking notes in a worn leather notebook. "You'll need to bring both children in tomorrow to give formal statements," Detective Schwartz said, closing her notebook. "I'm going to get a warrant for Norman Cummings tonight. We'll execute it first thing in the morning. Search his home and office for any evidence, computers, phones, photographs. If he's done this before, there might be a trail." "What about his wife?" Laura's voice was hollow. "Maya said she knew he was there. She let him. We'll be talking to Gladys Cummings as well. If she facilitated or enabled this abuse, she'll face charges too." Detective Schwartz's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Fisher, I know this is your family. I know it's hard, but your children are the priority now." Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face again. It was past midnight when they finally made it home. Austin carried Ethan, who'd fallen asleep, against his shoulder, while Laura guided a exhausted Maya inside. They put both kids in the master bedroom, unwilling to let them out of sight. In the kitchen, Laura finally broke down completely. Austin held her while she sobbed, her whole body shaking with the force of her grief. Grief for her children's lost innocence, for the illusion of family she'd clung to for so long, for the father she'd wanted to believe existed beneath the cruelty. "I should have known," she kept repeating. "I should have seen it. He was your father. You wanted to believe the best of him. He hurt our babies, Austin." She couldn't finish. Austin thought about all the times over the years when he'd wanted to cut ties with the Cummings family completely, all the times Laura had asked him to give them another chance, to understand that they were just old-fashioned, just set in their ways. He'd stayed silent for her sake, swallowed his anger for the sake of peace. "Never again. I'm going to destroy him," Austin said quietly. "Not just legally. I'm going to take everything from him. His reputation, his business, his legacy, everything." Laura pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm good at finding the truth, Laura. It's what I do. And I guarantee you Norman Cummings has more skeletons than just what he did to Maya. Men like that, They don't suddenly become predators at 70. There's a history, and I'm going to find it. Laura's eyes searched his face. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll make him pay for what he did. Not just legally, that might not be enough. Promise me he'll know what it feels like to lose everything. Austin kissed her forehead. I promise. The next morning, Austin woke to his phone buzzing with messages. The first was from Detective Schwartz. Warrant executed, Norman and Gladys in custody. Preliminary search yielding significant evidence. The second was from an unknown number, which turned out to be Philip. We need to talk, Philip's text read. Dad's lawyer called me. This is going to destroy the whole family. Austin didn't respond. Instead, he made coffee and sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, beginning the research that would consume the next weeks of his life. He started with public records, property holdings, business filings, lawsuits. Norman Cummings had spent 50 years building an empire, which meant 50 years of potential witnesses, victims, and evidence. By noon, Austin had found 3 civil suits filed against Cummings, properties all settled out of court with NDAs attached. 2 involved allegations of hostile work environment. One specifically mentioned inappropriate conduct with a minor child of an employee. Laura appeared in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept. The kids are still sleeping. I gave them Benadryl last night to help them rest. Austin showed her what he'd found. This settlement was 15 years ago. A secretary claimed Norman assaulted her 14-year-old daughter at a company Christmas party. Oh God! Laura sank into a chair. How did I not know? Because your family is very good at hiding things. Austin highlighted another document. And look at who signed the settlement agreement as a witness. Your mother. Laura's face went white. She knew. All these years she knew. Austin's phone rang. Detective Schwartz. Mr. Fisher, I wanted to update you on what we found in the search. Norman Cummings had a locked safe in his study. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Children. Mostly girls between ages 8 and 14. Some appear to be family photos, others. She paused. Others show signs of having been taken without the subject's knowledge. Upskirt shots, changing rooms, that sort of thing. Austin's hand tightened on the phone. How many children? We're still cataloging, but at least 20 different girls over what looks like a span of 30 years. We're working on identifying them now. Some appear to be relatives, cousins, nieces. Others might be children of employees or business associates. What about Gladys? She's cooperating fully, which is to say, she's admitting nothing but implying everything. She claims she didn't know about the photographs. But when pressed about your daughter's account of her being present when Norman came to your house, she says she was asleep in the car and didn't see where he went. Her lawyer's already trying to negotiate a deal. After the call ended, Austin sat in silence, processing. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Norman hadn't just hurt Maya. He'd been victimizing children for decades, and Gladys had enabled it through silence and complicity. Laura was crying again, but this time with anger mixed in. How many families did they pay off? How many children did they hurt? We're going to find out. Austin opened a new document on his laptop, and we're going to make sure every single person knows exactly who Norman Cummings really is. Over the next 2 weeks, Austin worked 18-hour days. He contacted the families from the old settlements, most of whom had been bound to silence by their NDAs. He dug through old newspaper archives, finding brief mentions of incidents at Cummings' properties quickly swept under the rug. He interviewed former employees who'd left under mysterious circumstances, piecing together a pattern of predatory behavior that stretched back to Norman's early 30s. What emerged was a portrait of a monster who'd used his wealth and power to silence his victims for over 40 years. The photographs in the safe dated back to the 1,980 seconds. Some of the girls were now middle-aged women who'd spent their lives trying to forget what Norman Cummings had done to them. Austin reached out to each one personally. Some refused to talk, the trauma still too raw decades later. But others were ready. They'd been waiting for someone to ask the right questions, to believe them, to give them a platform. By the 3rd week, Austin had 15 women willing to go on record. Their stories were remarkably consistent. Norman had used his position of authority, his family connections, his wealth to gain access to children, and then exploited that access. Some were daughters of employees who'd lost their jobs after complaining. Some were distant relatives who'd been dismissed as troublemakers when they tried to tell. One was a babysitter Norman had assaulted when she was 16, then paid off with money for college in exchange for her silence. Detective Schwartz's investigation was running parallel to Austin's. The DA's office was building a criminal case, but as Schwartz explained over coffee one afternoon, criminal cases were slow and uncertain. Even with all this evidence, a conviction isn't guaranteed, she said. Norman's lawyers are already claiming the photographs are innocent family photos, that the settlements were purely to avoid litigation costs. He'll probably plead down to something with minimal jail time given his age and health. That's not enough, Austin said. No, Schwartz agreed. It's not. But it's all the legal system can promise you. Austin thought about his documentary work, about the power of storytelling to change hearts and minds in ways that court cases couldn't. He thought about the women he'd interviewed, their courage in sharing their stories after years of silence. And he thought about Maya, who would have to live with what Norman had done to her for the rest of her life. He knew what he had to do. Austin spent the next month filming. He interviewed the 15 women who'd agreed to participate, each one telling their story in their own words. He included medical experts discussing the long-term impacts of childhood sexual abuse. He brought in legal analysts to explain how wealth and power create systems that protect predators. He documented Norman's business empire, showing how the same ruthlessness that made him successful in real estate also made him dangerous to vulnerable people. And he included his own family's story, Maya's brave testimony, Ethan's broken arm, Laura's painful reckoning with the truth about her father. With their permission, he included the photographs from the hospital, the police reports, the evidence that proved Norman Cummings was everything Austin's documentary accused him of being. He titled it The House That Norman Built. Philip tried to stop him. He called Austin dozens of times, leaving increasingly desperate messages. You'll ruin the whole family. Think about Laura's future, her inheritance. Think about the business. Austin didn't care about any of it. Sylvia reached out too, more sympathetically. I believe Maya. I believe all of them. But is this really necessary? The legal case is already destroying him. Yes, Austin told her. It's necessary. Because the legal case might get him a few years in prison. This will make sure he's remembered for exactly what he was. The documentary premiered at Sundance in January, 8 weeks after that nightmare Christmas dinner. It won the documentary award. Netflix bought it for distribution 2 days later. When it was released in March, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Norman Cummings became a national symbol of unchecked power and systemic abuse. His real estate empire collapsed within weeks as partners fled, tenants broke leases, and investors pulled out. The Cummings name, once synonymous with success, became synonymous with predation. Norman was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 25 years. At 71, it was effectively a life sentence. Gladys pled guilty to accessory charges and received 5 years, though her lawyer claimed her advanced age and diminished capacity should warrant mercy. Philip tried to salvage the business, but the damage was too extensive. Cummings' properties declared bankruptcy. The family estate was seized and sold at auction. Everything Norman had built, every piece of his legacy, was dismantled and destroyed. But Austin wasn't done. On the 1-year anniversary of that Christmas dinner, Austin released a follow-up short documentary. This one focused on the survivors, showing how they'd rebuilt their lives, how they'd found healing and purpose. He featured Maya, now 11, talking about her journey through therapy and her work advocating for other abuse survivors. He included updates from the women who'd first spoken out, many of whom had become activists and counselors themselves. The message was clear. Norman Cummings had tried to break these people, to silence them with money and threats and shame. And they had survived. They had spoken. They had won. In the final scene, Austin sat with Maya and Ethan in their living room. Ethan's cast had long since come off, but he still wore a small scar on his jaw from Norman's slap, a permanent reminder that Austin had turned into a teaching moment about standing up to bullies, about protecting the vulnerable. "Do you think Grandpa is sorry?" Maya asked, looking directly at the camera. Austin considered the question carefully. "I think he's sorry he got caught. I think he's sorry he lost his money and his reputation. But I might think if he could do it all over again, he'd just be more careful about hiding it." "That's sad," Maya said. "It is," Austin agreed. But here's what I want you to remember. His choices don't define you. They don't define any of his victims. You all get to write your own stories now, free from his shadow. The documentary ended with text on screen. Norman Cummings died in prison on November 15th, age 72. His estate was liquidated and the proceeds distributed among his victims. Gladys Cummings was released on parole after serving 18 months. She lives alone and has no contact with her surviving family members. Philip Cummings left the real estate industry and now works as a consultant. He declined to participate in this film. Laura sat beside Austin at the documentary's second premiere, holding his hand tightly. Their marriage had been tested by everything that had happened: her guilt over not seeing the truth sooner, her grief over losing her family, the stress of supporting two traumatized children through recovery. But they'd made it through, stronger for having faced the darkness together. "I never thanked you," she said quietly as the credits rolled. "For what?" "For being the kind of father who protects his children, the kind of husband who fights for his family, the kind of man who makes sure monsters face consequences." She turned to look at him. "My father was supposed to be that man. You showed me what it actually looks like." Austin kissed her forehead. "Our kids are going to grow up knowing that when someone hurts you, you don't stay silent. You don't protect the abuser. You fight back with everything you have." Later that night, after the reception and the congratulations and the interviews, Austin sat in his home office reviewing footage for his next project. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Schwartz. "For your information, 2 more women came forward today, inspired by your documentary. Both are filing civil suits against the estate. Your work is still making a difference." Austin smiled. Norman Cummings had spent his life building monuments to his own ego, buildings, businesses, a legacy he thought would outlive him. Instead, his real legacy was the courage of the people he'd tried to destroy, the justice that finally caught up with him, and the children who would grow up in a world that believed them when they spoke. In the bedroom down the hall, Maya was reading before bed, her nightlight casting a warm glow. Ethan was already asleep, his arm healed completely, bad dreams becoming less frequent as therapy helped him process the trauma. They would carry scars from what Norman had done, but they would also carry the knowledge that their father had moved heaven and earth to protect them, to seek justice, to make sure the man who hurt them paid the price. And that, Austin thought as he closed his laptop and headed to bed, was a legacy worth leaving. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.